folks coming in, so we'll have to just make some room. So I'm excited to see you all. It's a crowded space, makes me feel good, makes all of us feel good. Today's speaker, I know you all are going to get blown away. So we're just so honored and excited to see all of you here. So some shout outs. It's ESJ in the house. So I have the honor of getting us started today. So up here on stage with me, I'm going to transition the mic in a second, is our Education and Social Justice core team, who has been a big part, was core to making this event happen. So this team is the one that has, from day one, been organizing, been mobilizing, putting all the logistics together, and just day after day has been a part of the work that we do at ESG, and I want to recognize them up here. So I'm going to transition over to Elaine, our ESG program coordinator, who's going to give out some shout outs, but this team up here is, I'm just so lucky to have to work alongside each of you, so thank you all very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Elaine Mahari and I'm the program coordinator for the Education and Social Justice minor. We wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and extend our deep gratitude to all of the co-sponsors who helped to make this event possible. In particular, we would like to recognize the core team of the ESJ minor, Dr. Kristen French, Linda Spalding, and the student staff of the Center for Education, Equity, and Diversity, Elena Cervantes and the AS Social Issues Resource Center, Nate Pinello and the Ethnic Student Center, the Journal for Educational Controversy, the Diversity Fund, the Office of the Provost and Academic Affairs, the Secondary Education Department, the Woodring Equity and Diversity Committee, Woodring College of Education, and the Office of the Dean, and last but certainly not least, all of our volunteers and colleagues who helped to support and spread the word about this important event today. We would in particular like to highlight the immense amount of labor committed by students and student-led organizations to make this evening possible. And we hope this event will help us all continue to engage in and deepen conversation around how to center marginalized student voices and activism and recognizing their contributions as vital to our campus. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it off to Kylie Gemmel.
My name is Kylie Gemmel and I am a student intern for the Education and Social Justice Office. First, I'd like to recognize Dr. Tamara's spirit in summarizing her framing of the exploitation of labor on college campuses from last year's spring teach-in entitled Crossing the Margins, Intersectionality, Oppression, and Transformation. It is communities of color, Black communities, Indigenous communities, queers, feminists, and others whose identities are at the margins that institutions exploit for their labor. Due to the connection to capitalism and white supremacy, this is often done without recognition, protection, and compensation. We do not stand here without the visible and invisible labor of communities of color, who often do not receive accountability from the institution, but their lives and work make the discussion of diversity possible. I want to acknowledge the land we stand on as appropriated Coast Salish lands, and more specifically, that of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. The struggle for justice is a struggle for decolonization, and the two can never be disarticulated. Conversations about diversity depend upon us having an honest discussion about retribution and reappropriation of the land and resources. What might this really look like? With this in mind, and recognizing that we stand on colonized land and the ongoing exploitation of marginalized communities at this institution, we also must refuse to bring communities of color, particularly Indigenous communities, who are often asked to open up spaces in order to acknowledge the land, as a spectacle to legitimize projects of justice. Our campus is not an exception to this exploitation of marginalized communities that goes into diversity work. As a member of the Teach-In committee and the ESJ core team, I must do things differently, and we must do things differently as a committee and a team. We are working closely with the Native American Student Union and other members of the Native, Indigenous, and First Nation community at Western to determine protocols for how to open and honor spaces while recognizing the ongoing colonial project of higher education and displacement of Indigenous peoples. Our goal is to create intentional connections and relationships with the Native, Indigenous, and First Nation communities on our campus and within the local Indigenous communities. Next, I would like to welcome Marissa and Philip.
Hello everybody, my name is Marissa Anderly. I'm an MIT student, a student in the Master's of Teaching program, and I'm the graduate assistant that is hired to support the teach-in this year. So my job is to give you a little bit of history about this event series. This series of events began in 2014 when President Bruce Shepard wrote a blog where he criticized the overrepresentation of white students on Western's campus, stating that if we have not become more racially diverse in 10 years, then we will have failed as a university. This message was disseminated among conservative blogs and got caught up by national news. White supremacists responded to this by coming to campus with signs reading "Diversity equals white genocide." And this raised awareness about the scarcity of conversations around diversity and social justice on this campus. A few faculty members came together and led students, faculty, admin, and staff to work toward a better campus climate and organize the teach-in event. And teach-ins are traditionally demanded by students, and the school is shut down in order for students to educate each other about an issue that is relevant. So on this campus, the teach-ins were created to hold intentional conversations around race and racism. This is not enough, and although these events have been incredibly successful, we challenge all of you to take what you learn here and bring it back to your communities on and off campus. And we are so lucky to have David Stovall here today to contribute to these conversations. Thank you.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea, and I am the student liaison for ESJ. And sorry. Before we start, we wanted to open it up with a spoken word from Deja, who is Deja is an amazing, beautiful, inspirational freshman who I am so lucky and privileged to have met and have a relationship with. Relationship. Deja is an ESJ student. Deja has become involved with a lot of activism on campus, and through our conversations, we've really realized that that is not because she wanted to get involved, but because she felt like she had to for her livelihood on this campus. And so I think that that's really important to open up the space for her to do her work up here by starting with that. But yeah.
Okay, sorry, I might be a little nervous, but yeah. All right. Welcome to Bellingham. I see a sea of green and white, trees and clear skies, grass and fake allies, white liberals who stand on colonized land, who continuously marginalize, desensitize, and capitalize from the Black experience. Welcome to Bellingham. I see white people who support Bernie Sanders. They say, I see no color, I see wrong versus right, I don't see black and white. The same people who slander my very existence. Welcome to Bellingham. I see an institute not built for me. An institute that plays a good game of racism with a twinge of irony, because the same voice that they ask to be loud and proud about their blackness is the same voice that they silence, because being a little black means there is hope for assimilation, but being too black is a complication. Welcome to Bellingham. There are more black squirrels than black people, more black boots than black people, more black beanies than black people. Welcome to Bellingham. Wait, I'm sorry, I mean Bellingham. Active minds changing lives, a home for people to thrive, but if you are not the white majority, you will not survive. Thank you.
I feel like we need to give another round of applause. of coming across, so I am, I'm honored. So thank you for opening our space today. So it is my honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for today. Let's just hope I can make it through without falling apart here. I know that the couple times that he's come to class, he's somebody that I've known for quite some time, and has been a big part of my journey to this place. So let's see if I can get through. So Dr. David Stovall is an associate professor of educational policy studies and African American studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. His scholarship focuses on critical race theory, concepts of social justice and education, the relationship between housing and education, and the relationship between schools and community stakeholders. He has written extensively about race and racism and the role of community in creating transformative schools, drawing from the critical traditions in sociology, urban planning, political science, and educational policy, not to mention community organizing and youth culture. But he doesn't just write about it, he lives it. He has spent more than a decade working with community organizations and schools to develop and teach curriculum that addresses issues of social justice. Furthering his work with communities, students, and teachers, Dr. Stovall, which many of us know him as Stove, works with a collective of college professors in California, Arizona, and New York who teach high school courses in addition to their duties and responsibilities as university faculty. So in addition to being an internationally renowned scholar, he is also a high school teacher. It blows me away, right? He has won many well-deserved awards, including the Silver Circle Teaching Award for Excellence in Teaching at UIC. I know I speak for all those who have been impacted by him and his work, that he truly and fearlessly walks the talk. Now, at the National Association for Multicultural Education, I had a chance to introduce him as well as a keynote speaker there. And I want to share some of what I shared there with you all, because I think it's important to note sort of the personal impact, because many of us in this room can identify, and you always talk about that teacher who always got in trouble, but that was our favorite teacher. You know what I'm talking about, right? And so he's a big part of why I'm here. Now, we crossed paths at a time when I was seriously considering leaving graduate school. I felt that school was taking much more than it was giving. So what presented for me two important questions. He asked me, Vero, for what and for whom do you do this work? For what and for whom are we committed to struggling and fighting for? For what and for whom does this educational journey matter? For what and for whom are we willing to do the difficult work of reimagining educational spaces of radical possibility and transformation? These two questions were the reason I stayed included in my doctoral program. When I shared this experience with one of the mothers in the grassroots collective I organized with in Pasadena, California, they called him a gran maestro. For them, this meant someone who could see beyond which is limited by current oppressive realities and instills critical hope to do the hard work that lies ahead. Lastly, I want to share the words of one of his current students that I believe best exemplifies what it means to be a gran maestro. So here goes. Stovall has taught me to be clear about my sense of purpose and consistent in how I embody that mission through my work and, more importantly, my presence. He never told me this, he just does it. I remember asking him during my first year about his commitments and how thinly he was spread, but yet managed to push through and not lose himself. At that time, he was teaching undergrad classes, graduate classes, trying to publish, going on speaking engagements, attending conferences, working at Social Justice High School in Chicago, mentoring Ph.D. candidates, dealing with me as a student, and still balancing a personal life situated in an oppressive world. My question to Stovall was, how do you do it? He took a deep breath, shook his head, and responded with tired but an energetic spirit by saying, some days are better than others. It was then that I knew that Stovall struggles too, but he is deeply committed to doing his part of making social justice a tangible reality by contributing his work and his presence. So conference Stovall, published Stovall, Professor Stovall, high school teacher Stovall, one-on-one meeting with Stovall, community panel Stovall, grad school advisor Stovall, and just chillin' Stovall are all symmetrical to the person I'm proud to call my mentor. This is why he is not just hated by enemies of social justice, but loved by countless people he works with every day, including myself. Please join me in welcoming a gran maestro, Dr.
Indeed. Well, well, peace and greetings, y'all. I got this thing because I know they're recording me, but I got this loud teacher voice, so I'm not necessarily worried about whether or not folks can hear me. You all in the back, all right? In terms of a voice? Okay, cool. Let me thank again. And first, let me return to Kylie's point. I understand that my feet rest on the soil of bodies of the names that we know and do not know. Two of those nations are the Lumbi and Nooksack. Before I utter a word, I must recognize who they are and what they mean to this place. So it's critical before I start for a recognition of where I am, right? Now, real talk between Deja and Kylie, I was like, hey, look, what else I got to say to y'all? Shit. Right? I mean, in real terms, I mean, like, you know, because you get fooled out here, right? Because you come, like I came into Seattle, and then, you know, it's the Seattle thing, and then everybody got 12s on their stuff, and then, you know, you go, then you come here, and then folks is telling me the story, you know, the orcas come in the winter. Oh, shit, right? And you're like, damn, you know, I'm thinking about, like, I'm coming back to see the orcas, shit, right? I just want to see that, right? A killer whale that's not in SeaWorld, right? You know, getting further exploited, right? Right? So this thing around, so now you got all that, and then you got the breweries and all this other stuff happening, and then I hear Deja's poem. I'm like, oh, that's what it is, right? So now, when we talk about justice, these things that have happened over the last 18 months here are not a thing that is site-specific to Western Washington University. We must always understand them on the continuum to justice. And that is a difficult continuum, right? So when Veto introduced me, first, the real talk of that, I always feel like, okay, who the hell is she talking about, right? But the second piece is always really understanding what is here, right? What people are going through, right? So I want to thank the core committee and all the folks who take education for social justice classes and keep that place living. Because this is the thing in a moment like this. Our lives are critically important because this moment is something that we've seen before, but also is more intense. And what do I mean by that? Now you got somebody who's running for president who can say all this hateful shit and galvanize people. And I think it's really important to understand what that is. So it's not just Donald Trump, right? But it's the ideology that makes Donald Trump normal, right, and good to people. And that's what we have to think about, right? Because Donald Trump is coming to Chicago next Tuesday, right? Now, he gonna get a lovely Chicago welcome, right? By a whole bunch of the homies, right? And Secret Service is probably gonna have a field day with us. But at the same time, what does it mean? Because in these spaces, there have been a group of young folks who have claimed their lives as critically important to themselves in a place where it's not reflected, right? So if you think about, you know, you all's time, and some of you all are freshmen here, when they brought you here, you did your orientation, and you walking around like, ooh, look. And the first, a lot of y'all just thinking about, shit, college, right? What you about to do? College stuff, right? You know, I don't even know what that is, but it's college, right? Then you see the folks skateboarding, then the random folks, whatever, right? And then y'all say, like, this is where I'm coming, right? And then you get here and you're like, oh, what? What is happening here, right? Because look at how our language shifts, right? And watch this quick experiment. All right. How many of you all, by a show of hands, have been the only in your classroom? Now, why do you know what I'm talking about and I only said one word? Only. So what does it mean to have that experience all the time, right? A colleague and mentor of mine, William Smith, calls that, over time, there's a deleterious weathering effect of racism, right? He refers to it as racial battle fatigue. In these spaces where you are actually experiencing over time your degradation, right? This thing around you being excluded, this thing around you being called on only when it's opportune, right? Now, and thanks to, again, the ESJ team for the flyer. I was like, damn, who is that dude? That's fresh, right? But the thing is, in the upper right-hand corner, it's all these organizations. But guess what? I can bet you there's at least a 70 to 80% overlap with the same people on all those organizations. I already know it. I already know it. Because you get called. Can you be on a random committee? Right? Don't call it diversity committee. Don't call it equity. It's some random shit. Right? Something random that you really don't know what it means in the first place, but they want to bring you there because they can say that they brought you there. And then when you raise hell, then they say stuff like, why are you being so difficult? You're not nice like such and such. Right? Because that's always the thing. We want to be nice. Y'all got this Pacific Northwest nice shit happening here. Right? Let's call it what it is. That is passive aggressive behavior. Right? Let's be clear. That ain't got shit to do with Pacific Northwest nice. That's you being passively aggressive. Right? That's like when somebody is trying to get out of a relationship and don't want to say that they want to get out of a relationship, but do everything to make the person leave. That's what that is. Right? So now if we can at least start there, now we can have a different set of questions, right? So I come to you all from a place where there's a lot happening, and it's happening in a way that's being reflected on you all here in the Pacific Northwest in terms of what will be the future of this thing that we call public education. So there is a movement across the country to end public education as we know it, right? But it's paired with something. And I think it's important to understand the pairing. And if some of you all are from the Seattle area, you really understand this, right? In Seattle, they are building something every square foot, right? They're building something that no one has access to, right? You got 3 feet that cost $500,000 in Seattle, right? And the question that I'm always asking is, who is this for? And what is the rationale for this place? And now, who can be excluded? And on the backs of their exclusion, what can we now claim? So coming here, I see a whole lot of that. Because when students have made a call to their humanity, they've been met with the rhetoric of them being difficult, right? They've been met with this rhetoric of things are good here. Says who? We don't mean any harm, but someone is discussing with you their trauma, trauma is not perceived. Trauma is experienced. And if we understand that trauma as experienced, then what do we actually do? And what does it actually mean, right? So I am thankful that I read a statement by a group of folks who call themselves the Student Assembly for Power and Liberation. I was like, damn. I was like, look, man, I'm like, man, Western Washington, y'all getting down on folks. I'm like, man, power and liberation, like, that's a heavy piece, right? But it only gets that heavy because the thing that you've experienced is even heavier. So now you are responding and being proactive in a space that you know is intending to traumatize you. Let us lift the myth. If there are any students of color here in this building, you are not here because Western Washington University loves you, right? Let's be clear. That's how I start orientation with freshmen at UIC. You are not here because anybody loves you. You are here in spite of this place. In fact, this place makes money when you leave after first semester, right? Because university budgets are predicated on what? Freshman enrollment, right? So they make money when you leave, right? So graduating from a place like this is an act of resistance in many cases before it is an act of compliance, right? So if we understand that from the beginning, then our analysis changes, right? The way in which we interact with each other changes. Because now it should be, and let's lift the veil again. Structures and systems have never been built to destroy themselves. Structures and systems are built to maintain order, power, and compliance. So when there's any movement towards justice, it is often against that system which is intended to get folks in compliance before it gets them to destroy it. So now we're asking a very simple question that we have to be honest about, right? Because we don't like to say, these are triggering words, but I think words that we have to engage, right? So I understand Western Washington University, just like the University of Illinois at Chicago, as hostile and violent. I want to say that, right? Because one of the ways to actually engage folks in deeper violence is to put a veil on your acceptance. Because now when it happens to you, it's more shocking, right? It has a greater deleterious effect. So now, if I understand this space, and you all do it good, right? You know, y'all got the arboretum, all the wood panels on the buildings and shit, right? You know, y'all, you can do like a nature walk if you want to take a break, right? They got all that shit, and you can tell folks, just go for a walk, right? And y'all get up the hills. A group of folks walked me through the hills. I was like, damn, it's not even a sidewalk. It's just a hill. You go through the whole little piece. I'm like, damn, I'm walking through the trees and shit. I'm like, damn, there's birds and shit, eagles and shit. I'm like, you coming from the bricks and then you come into like eagles, right? You're like, damn, what's happening here, right? So you can get, and look at what it does to your physical, right? Because now you're all up here. And right here is something that's in front of you, something that is reminding you of your inhumanity. So when you claim it, it is always viewed as a threat, right? So where I'm from in Chicago, this thing has come really hard on folks. So the state of Illinois has not had a budget for the last 9 months, right? So if we think about this, so anything that gets any state dollars has not received any since June 30th, 2015. So drug treatment centers have closed. Preschools that receive state appropriations have not paid their bills for 9 months and are preparing to close. There's an institution on the south side of the city called Chicago State that is actually about to close its doors permanently, right? Chicago State is will be 150 years old next year. My father graduated from Chicago State in 1962. They will not accept freshmen this year, and they will close their doors. Now, Chicago State students' population is 80% black, 10% Latino. Of that group, the majority are second chance students, non-traditional students, and veterans. So in Chicago, less than 3 miles from my house is a reminder of anti-black space. So some of us read theories of anti-blackness, but here it is on the ground. It is guaranteed that you are denied basic human rights. Some of you saw nationally a young person by the name of Laquan McDonald take 16 shots to the body, right, by an officer named Patrick Van Dyke. But what wasn't in the national news, that the city of Chicago over the last 5 years has settled for over $100 million for police deaths. So think about this, right? It is normal, right, and good to possess, destroy, and kill the black body. I live in a city that has determined it will send folks to jail before it provides them with a quality education, right? Despite the uneven numbers around what it costs to incarcerate folks. So what does it mean in this space where folks are catching holy hell? When I saw the Student Assembly for Power and Liberation, the first thing that came to my mind was, I need to understand what solidarity is with them. And there's a deep lesson around solidarity that I always take and think about 2 years ago what happened in the summer in Ferguson, Missouri. Some of you all who are on Facebook may have seen this. There were a group of Palestinians who sent a Facebook post to the folks in Ferguson. And what they said just resonates in my head. They said, when you are being tear gassed, this is what you need to do. When there are blockades thrown up on your homes, this is what you need to do. When they have declared martial law, here is how you need to move. And then they said something very interesting at the end. They said, remember, we love you. Your struggle is good and right. You will win. Right? Now, this is from folks 8,000 miles away who are seeing the same thing happen to folks. Because historically, many folks in the Palestinian movement have looked to the Black Power movement for ways to organize. And they said, at this moment, we are returning the gift you gave to us. So now, what is my responsibility as someone coming here to Western Washington, to a place where folks have claimed an assembly for power and liberation, right? One that has actually called out white supremacy for what it is. See, we're not talking about white extremists, right? That's a very different thing. We need to understand white supremacy as the ideology in real time, right? So the beliefs, views, and values of white Western European descended Christian males as normal, right, and good. Now, if there are white European descended Christian heteronormative white males in this audience, I ain't even talking about you. All right? All right? Take that one on, because the ideology of white supremacy is what is most important. Because white supremacy affects folks of color. Because if I can internalize that belief of what is normal, right, and good, I am much more prone to inflict that harm on someone who looks like me before it's someone outside of my group. So white supremacy has a deleterious effect, right? But an internalizing one. And if we don't think about this, it becomes critically important, right? So when you all think about colonialism or decolonization, this is it in real time. It means, what does it mean to break yourself from those sets of belief and to self-determine what the next steps are forward? It is a grueling task, but one you are built for. one that you have to do. Because if you don't, the same thing will happen. And more importantly, that thing will intensify. It gets worse, right? So I'll be 44 years old this June, right? I work with high school seniors during 8th period. I'll say that again. High school seniors during 8th period. Y'all know what y'all was doing 8th period. I was like, look, what? I don't even know what he's talking about. Look, what you about to do after this? Right? That was my 8th period conversation, right? 25 years ago, I was like, look, I don't even know what he on. Look. Right? Especially on Fridays, right? It's like, so I just get a big X, right? But this thing around what I do know about my students now is that the world has intensified. So I can't go back into this thing, back in my day, I used to have a shovel and a rock. No, right? Because I'm lying to them, right? But what I can say is the Illinois Criminal Code will try to try you as an adult at 16. Right? The case that actually was about life without parole for youth comes out of Illinois. Right? The state of Illinois spends $77,000 to keep a young person incarcerated, and the district that spends the most per student for education only spends a third of that. So now I need to understand them as in an intense world, right? A world that perpetually castigates them, right? So now when I talk to folks, I always worry like, damn, Stovall, they hear Stovall, and everybody runs out the room. We all gonna die. Damn, Stovall, I already came here mad. Now I'm mad and depressed, right? But this thing around really understanding that, right? And what I've learned from young people in Chicago, across the country, and here's what at Western Washington, is you all have committed yourself not just to the larger project of justice, but to joy and healing. Right? It's a very different thing. Healing is not a hokey thing in these conditions. Healing is something that you must do. And what I've seen young folks do in places like Chicago, Miami, New York, when they claim that their lives matter, it's a very different statement, but a statement from 50 years ago. And we very rarely connect them, right? So the Black Panther Party said, we understand that the liberation of Black people is the liberation of all oppressed people on the planet. So Opal Tomiti, Patrice Cullors, and Alicia Garza, 50 years later, say, we claim that our lives are valuable to ourselves because we understand that the liberation of Black people is also connected to the liberation of all oppressed groups on this planet. And then, before we start to claim all these negative aspects around Black Lives Matter, we need to listen to them, because the first Black Lives Matter statement after the Trayvon Martin trial actually talked about the death of trans women. They say until there is no more transgendered woman or man killed for who they are in the world, we will make a claim to our lives being important to us, if to no one else. So now, when they say this, I see that as an extension, right? It's an understanding, right? Until no more people come to borders and are oppressed and are kidnapped and are shot by chumps who call themselves Minutemen. Until there's no more families who are given strange refugee statuses and then refuted, right? Until there is no more place in a school that actually resembles itself closer to a prison than it does a space of learning, our lives matter. And I dare any human being to challenge me on the mattering of my life to myself. And that's what they were saying. Not the Fox News shit you're getting. Not the report about them being a terrorist organization. Not the report about them actually being anti-law enforcement. Because what they have asked us is a question that is a difficult one. They say things like, can we imagine a world without prisons and police? It's a different piece. So some of you all may study prison abolition here. And I used to be confused by it when I would first hear the term. But prison abolition is understood to be the abolishing of the conditions that create the process of people going to prison. It's a very different call. So now, if we are committed to this thing, what is in our radical imaginary? Now, the radical imaginary, because see some of y'all gonna come after I leave, and he's like, oh, Stovall came, radical imaginary. What is he talking about? This is what it means. So James Baldwin challenged us to think about who we are in very different ways. The first thing he said was, we need to think differently about how we will move in the world. So the radical imaginary is saying, we need to understand the world as we know it. What is in the world? What are the things that are real, that are affecting people? And then from that space, we can now imagine and work towards changing that reality. Hard work. Work that is not necessarily approved by the powers that be, right? And in a place like this, I can see what they already do to y'all, right? They give y'all the send-off, right? They say, oh yeah, we really understand. And then they hope you all walk out the room, right? And then they say, ooh, we just got out of that one. And then when you come again, they go, oh shit, here they come again. We really care, right? And then y'all sit down and say, okay, we ain't leaving. And you're like, damn, right? Because now they caught in between, right? They don't know if they should call security. They don't know if they should call the police. And then they say, okay, you can stay, right? And then they come back at you and say, well, can we meet with one of you? That's always the trick, right? We just want to meet with one. And then y'all say, hell no, it's all of us. We coming. In fact, we don't need to even meet here. We're going to meet at your house, Prez. All right, I heard y'all president got like 2 houses, right? It's like the house and the house, right? So where I don't know what happens at the house, right? That's the real secret knowledge meeting, right? So this thing around looking at this from a very different perspective is saying, look, if we're moving in this way, then we understand our struggle as collective. And in that collective struggle, there are things that we understand as non-negotiables that are not beyond the ask of the university. Because let's lift another veil on higher education. Higher education is less about budgets than it is about the will to make change. All right? See, budget is a soft excuse. The thing is real, because this is how it always is proven to me. When you all get that new random building, do you all say, like, where the hell did that come from? What? Like y'all building a new basketball arena here, right? And it's gutted out. I'm like, man, they about to do it big in here, right? And I'm saying to myself, and then I'm thinking, where did that come from? Right? Who was that for? Right? Because the rebuilding of the basketball arena is more a recruiting tool than it actually is for your use. Now, university won't say that. And I'm saying that because, I leave tomorrow. Right? So what does it matter? Right? So this thing around how these things are perpetuated against our bodies, right? Because we live in a world where the death of black bodies is understood as normal, right, and good, right? I am a criminal before I am a human in the United States. And it's important to understand that structurally. And if I don't understand that structurally, then I can get duped. And then more importantly than me getting duped, I can justify more do harm to people who look just like me. I can start to make up excuses and say things like, they weren't supposed to be over there anyway. Right? I was in you all's little local coffee shop downtown. Was it Woods? And we sitting down, and the two bike cops ride past, and then they ride past again. Right? And then they sit down. About 12 seats down. But then I look over, and then it just became a game of messing with them, right? Because we sit down 12 down, so it's me and another person of color, and they. Right? Y'all got this with camp. Y'all got this thing with campus safety, right? Ain't got shit else to do but mess with you, right? Where are you going? Where you think I'm going? Do you have an ID? No. But I guess this is the time I get arrested, right? Now they write you up in the report as hostile, right? Because the understanding is that if you are here first, then your body represents criminality before it actually is a student, right? And then they brush it off as that's the bad actor. That's a trick of white supremacy, right? You get to individualize the event. No, the event has been approved before it actually even happened. And that's what we need to understand. So when we understand this, now it changes up the dynamic, right? Because it's not this thing around we got bad people here in the Pacific Northwest. What we have is a reflection of the larger world, or what Saidiya Hartman would often refer to as the afterlife of slavery. Right? Because we don't think about this, right? The 13th Amendment says slavery ended except where? Jail. Right? So now, if I'm thinking about somebody who is being quote unquote called illegal, the first thing I'm thinking about as a black person is that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment is violated on the heads of black folks every day. Hence, they have been determined by the United States government as illegal. So I want to see myself in solidarity with folks who actually are crossing an artificial border. Because we forget in the United States, there was stuff like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We never want to talk about that. Right? We never want to talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Right? We never want to talk about the Indian Relocation Act or the formation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Right? Because it's every time that we talk about this historical event, oh, Stovall, you're just bringing these things to down us. This is a problem that we have in schools, right? History is boring because of the narrative that we've created, right? Because the majority of the stuff is false in the first place. And we start with little ones. We got random white dudes chopping down cherry trees. Come on, man. Come on. Well, what are we doing? Right? Then we got to go the wrong way, bring all his homies, and he get a holiday. I'm like, damn. So we starting off from a bogus enterprise, right? So what if you had a group of kindergartners who just rose up one day and was like, look, this is what we know about Columbus. Fool went the wrong way. He went the wrong way 3 times. He brought all his homies to bring death and destruction. And instead of our little Columbus Day pageant, what if they did quotes from his ship log? All right? The Taino people are beautiful, beautiful, statuesque, regal people. They would make the greatest of slaves. That's Columbus's words, not mine. So now, if we think about this differently, right? We don't even have a conversation about who Woodrow Wilson was, right? A Klan sympathizer, right? President of the United States, right? Tried to lock Jewish folk out of Princeton, right? And they say, well, see, Stovall, if we knew all this stuff, then we wouldn't do it in the first place. Maybe that's the point. if we knew all this on the back end, maybe there would be more kindergarten rebellions. Maybe there would be more students refusing to be in a place where they're being dehumanized. Right? Because my students send me texts, and they're like, look, we walking out today. You're like, damn. All right? And then one time my students told me in class, like, you're going to see us on TV tomorrow. And here I am, I turn on TV, and I'm like, damn, they told me. Right? And they're saying, like, look, we have to be in a space where we're claiming our humanity. If no one else will claim it for us, then we have to claim it ourselves. So I see the Student Assembly for Power and Liberation as a necessary claim to your humanity, because no one else will claim it for you. And if you do not claim it, they will justify undue harm. Right? So now, at universities, being a college professor for 15 years, I've learned one hard and fast rule about university life. Talk is the cheapest. Like, we can talk your ear off in a university, woof you to death, right? The most important thing is, who are the people who follow through? Who are the people who make their words and actions meet? And those are the people that you actually engage, right? Because this space makes you think about, like, being here for a couple of days. It made me think about this a whole lot different, right? So I'm seeing spaces like Education for Social Justice, and I'm hearing, like, we were in some classroom and tell me the name of the Treehouse College, Fairhaven. And that's like the Treehouse. Like, it looked like that. That's what it reminded me of. I was like, it's a treehouse. Right? You walk out and you're like, oh, shit. Like, that's why they took me over in the little road and all the little joints. So in Fairhaven, i.e. Treehouse College, they got a class that's designed for 12 folks, and there's 40 people in there. And I'm like, damn, there's 40 people trying to get in this one class about critical pedagogy. What does that mean? Right? So this is what it means at Western Washington University. So if students are organizing for power and liberation, one of the things that they have put forward is a demand to say these programs that we care about need to be supported. Period. You cannot have 250 students be the responsibility of 2 faculty members. You cannot. Right? Because when you do that, you guarantee their failure. You have set them up to fail. Right? So now, if you got 3 more faculty, now instead of 45, you got 35, right? In a place for 12, right? You're still short, but at the same time, there's a commitment there. And you can't have this space, because that was the thing about Fairhaven. Y'all got all the social justice language. Y'all social justice up in Fairhaven. Y'all got all the right shit to say, right? But here's the point. I am very concerned about the rhetoric of social justice, because it's been reduced to rhetoric, right? It's been this thing around pick up the trash day. Right? It's been this thing that's reduced to, yeah, we go and see a high school once. I went to Burlington Edison High School today. Right? And if any of the young homies from Burlington Edison are here, I want to shout y'all out for sure. Yeah? Brother Mike Sampson and the good people, right? And one of the things that they were saying was, look, we understand when we walk into a classroom, those brown babies respond to us because they are seeing for the first time, in many cases, someone who looks like them. But more importantly, someone who has the greatest capacity to love them, because they have been in an experience where they are not loved. And that search for love is critical. And what I've seen here over the last 2.5 days is a group of young folks who are searching for love in the face of extreme hate. So now, in that space, we have to be, what is the responsibility to them, right? Or as Gloria Ladson-Billings says, we are not talking about an education gap. We're talking about an education debt. What is owed to them, given the conditions? What is owed to them because of the struggles that they endure every day? And how are we either committed or faulty in that shift? Now, in Chicago, I've also learned something from these young activists. They have said clearly that they operate from a Black, queer, feminist analysis. It's totally different, right? Because what do they say? One, the understanding of our Blackness is central to our humanity. Queering. The Black body is queered in the United States, in the Western Hemisphere. It is made strange. It is made unpopular. It is made as something to be possessed. We are reversing it. Our bodies belong to us, and we understand how they are queered. Feminist. If we look at any movement across the world, there are two people who are deeply connected to those movements who very rarely get credit: women and young people. So our feminism claims that relationship. And it's really something to see, right? Because you can see the most thugged out cat, right? It's like, yeah, man, I operate from Black, queer, feminist analysis. You're like, oh, damn, right? And then they say, and then I love how they respond, and they say, and we actually know what that means. Because that's another secret that we do here in college, right? So college professors, we give you these $15 words that we're not even sure what they mean. And then we quiz you on the meaning when we're not even sure ourselves, and then give you a bogus grade, right? That's what a good friend of mine calls tricknology, right? Or academic pimping, right? So now, if I'm to upset that setup, all the things that we've engaged, there has to be a commitment to deconstruct them because they're connected to our lives, right? So that Black, queer, feminist analysis is living in the bodies of young people in Chicago, Washington, D.C., Miami, New York, and here at Western Washington. They have articulated it. They have been painfully intentional about what this place has become. And they are determined to interrupt it. What will be the support of the interruption? I always think about Frantz Fanon. He says, young people will fulfill their destiny or betray it. I would argue that there's a living example here at Western Washington of young people who are willing to fulfill that destiny in the face of pain and heartache. But they are committed. And I am more than thankful and proud of them. Not as an older person, but understanding my commitment to them in struggles like these. Because at any given moment, it could be me. And I'm constantly reminded by that in places like Woods Cafe. I am not fearful of the persecution that comes with this. Because the justice condition is determined by the people who have experienced the injustice. And sometimes that's a long road. Sometimes it's very difficult. I want to engage those contradictions. Sometimes it's tough, right? And I've seen that in talking with these young folks here. It's tough. Yeah, it gets on your nerves. It's tough to wake up some days, right? Some of y'all who by a show of hands has been in these situations. You crying, you don't even know you crying. So you feel in your face, oh, damn, oh, damn, right? Like one time I was doing that in front of my mother, and she was like, child, what is wrong? What is going on? I was like, man, I don't even know, damn, right? But this thing around our futurity, right? So our push towards the future is in our ability to heal, right? And that healing space becomes just as important as the space where we make demands, right, on power. our ability to heal will be the thing that gets us through. Because we live in a world that says it is not normal, right, and good for folks who experience injustice to heal. That is you making a very conscious and committed claim, right? And that healing comes out in very particular ways, right? It can come out in you all just going to a space, decompressing. It can come out in the form of you all actually doing a reading group, right? I used to think it came out in playing basketball, but that sometimes brings more frustration. Like you go to hoop and then everybody is like fighting. You're like, damn, right? And then you'll say, like, damn, everybody is stressed, right? So then the recognition of our stress, right? And in that stress and reducing that stress, we are also reducing further harm. Because what we know is that when people are stressed, there's a greater propensity for them to do harm to other people. So now, in that reduction of that stress, we are now equipping ourselves and replenishing ourselves for the fight ahead, right? Because struggle, and this is kind of a thing that community organizers remind me of all the time, struggle owes you nothing but more struggle. What will you do because of it? Right? That's what it's supposed to be. So now, if struggle owes you nothing but struggle, what is our healing? Understanding that to be the beginning of our radical imaginary. It's a very different position, but one I'm willing to embrace, one I'm willing to get in trouble about, one I'm not fearful of as much because these things are happening. And what I see here at Western Washington is what I understand to be a continuum of the last 50 years of struggle. So in that space, how do we remain committed? How do we remain understanding, and how is it transmitted to the folks who come after us? Because let's lift another veil. Universities hope that the quote unquote activists graduate, right? They hope for that. It's like, look, that's the last time we got to see them, right? So now, if we understand that struggles are perpetual, what is the work to actually inform the young folks who come after you? Like we went down to college, you had 4 days before the first day of classes. I was fighting, chasing people through houses, sleep under bushes, right? And then I just get up, I'm like, college. Yeah, homie, I'm finna do it, right? I'm calling all the homies back at the house. Like, man, this college shit, you should mess with this, man. You know, you ain't got nobody calling you. Damn, you can go to class when you want to, right? Until the grades come, right? But then there were it was a group of older students who were like, young blood, look, let me cuff you up real quick. This is what you need to know. The university makes money for you just being here one semester. Do not fulfill their destiny. Finish here. Do your work. Demand justice. But do not let these folks skate. We're not giving you what you came here for. All right? So when you talk about banging for freedom, freedom also comes with you being equipped to fulfill your destiny. Right? And that destiny is collective. So I learned from them. They got me in study groups. They got me working in the community. And I'm like, oh, this is what this is. Right? So now 25 years later, I'm talking in front of you. And it was only because of them. It is because of their commitment to me. And now the responsibility that they gave me to engage other folks in the same way. And I want to say another thing to folks who are doing this work here. Your job is never to convert people. You never have to worry about conversion, right? You're not here to convert folks, right? This is what will happen. And this is, a good friend of mine calls this the veil of justice. When folks start to see who you are in the day-to-day and the work that you do, they will start to ask you about the work that you do. And that is the moment to invite them into the work. Do not exploit them. Be honest with them and support them. Right? Ella Baker always says, we are the ones that we have been waiting for. I see that in y'all. But it's also understood that that takes work. And that possibility towards futurity is only met if we are committed to the work here moving forward, but also being deeply informed by our history. This is not a new thing, but a necessary thing that must be the continuum of the work moving forward. Folks 50 years told us that, 50 years ago told us that, folks 100 years ago before that told us, or folks 100 years before that told us, and folks told us 100 years before that. During slave revolts in 1548 in Florida. So now, how do we continue as the hopes and the dreams of folks who have paved this way? What is our responsibility? How do we make sure that it does not end with us? And that's the work moving forward. All right? Is this making sense? All right. I'm always worried about like a staring contest ensuing after this. We're fearful he's going to spit on us. No. But this thing around our work is deeply connected, right? And I see what I'm doing in Chicago as deeply connected to you all. I'm seeing the failures that I have as somebody trying to do this work in Chicago as deeply connected, right? I see the victories and the joy. But at the same time, I know that that victory and joy is worked for, right? And some days are always better than others. But that's okay. It's what we should be doing. And let me say in closing, I am eternally thankful to see your faces doing this work. There is no one on the planet like y'all, right? You are a continuation of what we have hoped to do, right? Every day, I wake up because of y'all, right? So that thing, to me, and excuse my emotion, but that for me is what it means. That's when people are struggling to drink water in Flint, right? This is when people are claiming their lives, right? And in a world that says they should not, that they should die in their own degradation. How do we change that, right? You all have changed that for me. You have changed my understanding. You remind me of the work moving forward. I am forever indebted, and I will work as hard as humanly possible to work with you to fulfill your destiny, because the world wants us to betray it. And I will not take part, right? So thank y'all so much. Right?
Forgive us all again. Learn to laugh and cry and learn things. But yeah, anyways, so I didn't get a chance to introduce myself earlier. I'm Justin Yao Liu. I am the Education and Social Justice intern, and I've had the pleasure of being a part of the minor from the beginning. I wrote a little something while I was sitting down, so I'll say that. All right, I got left the fun part of introducing the Q&A portion. So it's my hope those currently grappling with social justice struggles, thought, and practices have been enlivened by David Stovall today, Dr. David Stovall. And to those now arriving and seeing the necessity for social justice, to unlearn anti-Blackness, to unlearn colonial ways of knowing and being, and commit to social justice, have arrived here today. And I thank you for joining us. And now we will have a question and answer period. And I was going to run the microphone around, but I don't know where it is anymore. Yeah. So if you have questions, raise your hand.
I told y'all it was going to be a staring contest. All right. Are they going? Is camera affect?
How are you not depressed all the time?
Right. I mean, because I think it's a really important question, right? I think this understanding around this work moving forward, and that it is not us by ourselves, right? So how do we engage in spaces that remind us that we're not by ourselves? Because the first thing that pushes us away from the work is our sense of isolation, right? So this is a big thing around teaching, right? So teachers don't leave the profession because of crazy administrators or students. The majority of teachers leave the profession of teaching because of isolation, right? They feel as if there's no one to talk to, that there's no one who understands what it is that they're going through, right? So this means for me to find that group of folks who I can talk to about, man, this is what's happening. And then they can say, okay, this is what we did when this happened, right? And then that space is the one that reminds us, right? And then, we think about it, some people think about it as hokey, but one of the practices of meditation is to understand what is happening, but now how are we envisioning the work forward? So in that thinking, in that meditation, one of the things that I say to myself is, who will I do this work with, right? And now, after that, going to find them, right? So this thing around always being present, right? So in meditation practice, they always tell you about the art of being present. But being present is saying these things are happening, but there is joy when there's joy in the claim to our humanity, right? And to really understand that is a space of joy, right? And that not one of degradation, because so many things have pushed up on us not to claim our humanity. And this thing around, so I have looked at a lot of work of Fannie Lou Hamer, right? And we often talk about, so some of you all have seen CNN correspondent Sanjay Gupta, right? He does this little, you can YouTube it, it's this little it's not even 10 minutes, it's this little 3-minute thing, and it's called Your Mind on Music. Some of you all may have seen this, right? And you can YouTube it, right? But what he talks about is music actually stimulates and or soothes the brain, right? Because the common assumption was only classical music did that. But what we actually see is indigenous music, black sacred music, also called gospel, does it because what folks who were in captivity understood, and this is a big thing about water, is that the vibrations in us singing actually calms our body, right? So these are the spaces that we pull to actually bring joy, because if we don't, we get deeper in that hole that we can't get out of, right? So be very committed to those spaces where you find joy, right? And that is what I have to do in very real ways, because it does get tough. I don't want to lie to you all, right? It gets funky, but in the same time, you want to be able to find that joy. And stuff like music, stuff like exercise, stuff like talking with folks that we care about, about this thing, it has really been useful for me in the last little bit. Uh-huh.
I'm just wondering how you were able to, not even an hour, do what our teacher wasn't able to do in the last 2 months. I've sat in a classroom and I haven't felt this way about the topic at all. Like I'm pissed because it's just been annoying. And what you did in 2 hours, they hit on every topic that we talked about in class, but actually made it useful and relevant and interesting. So I'm just wondering, are you going to train our teachers?
All right. So that's actually, it's an apropos question, because that's actually what I do, right? So one of the things, and I was talking to Mike's class today at Burlington Edison, one of the things that this is one of the things why I work in high schools, I always imagined, what would I want my high school teacher to be like, right? So now, from that space, that's how I try to engage, right? Because I had these 2 high school teachers who were they were polar opposites, but they really were clear about communicating, right? They were excellent communicators, right? And one was like super chilled out, and the other one was super intense, right? But I would learn from them and say, what is it that we're trying to communicate? And that's the first question, right? So in working, because in working at a high school, I also work with pre-service teachers. And one of the first things I have to actually talk about is, don't be boring to yourself. Right? Because that's the thing, because teaching real quick can become hella didactic, right? And then you bored yourself, right? And you saying stuff like, shit, all right, we're going to go to the next lesson. And then your students, they laid out. Hell would be in sleep. They laid out in the back of the class. But this thing around making this thing being not just relevant, but interesting to my own self. And I think there's another part to that. To be clear what it is that we're talking about. So nothing without research, right? So all our stuff. So the first thing I tell my students is like, look, given the history of teaching in the United States, there's no reason to trust me as your teacher. Right? So what happens on the first day? They're like, what you talking about? Hold on, man, it's 8th period. What are you doing? Right? But I'm trying to get out of here. Somebody just told me that they like me, right? But this thing around really being clear about that, right? So what is it that we're trying to do? How are we trying to do it? And in the last part, who of the people that we know does it well, and what can we learn from them? Right? So I am the extension of my 4th grade teacher, Miss Lester, who challenged me to a fight. Right? But she, in that challenge, in the fight, she said, look, the rest of the world wants to do something to you. What you're going to do in this classroom is prove them wrong. Right? And that was her as a 4th grade teacher giving me a heavy lesson on anti-blackness, decolonialism, deconstruction, and white supremacy. Right? So now I understand myself as an extension of that. And now, I guess the last part, right? If we do not know, what is our commitment to find out? And how can we do that collectively, right, in our classes? So that's how I'm trying to communicate with folks who are becoming teachers and in my own teaching. Thank you for that question.
healing spaces. We've been invited to healing spaces, which, you know, I'll show up to them, and what ends up happening is a very white supremacist.
Right.
Like healing for white folks, or healing for men, or healing for, you know,
Right.
folks who may not need as much of a deeper process or healing. So like, you could speak about like ways that you've seen healing be like ethical, that like center to marginalized voices, that like healing that's like efficient and more like just that actually works.
Right.
For folks who need like healing on campus.
Thank you for that question, because I think one of the most important things in that is actually we got an example of that tonight, right? So when Kylie actually read that statement, what it does is, and a lot of my folks who are organizers, they talk about one of the most important things to even engage a space is to clear space, right? You have to make space. And in making space, you make a very explicit statement around what it is that you are trying to do, right? And then how are you actually dealing with those things in that space? And if this is not your particular struggle, then it's best for us to prioritize the folks who are actually going through this thing, right? And then another way is what I saw last night, right? Just folks gathering up and saying, look, we're going to meet such and such and such and such. Be there, homie, right? And then you all make the terms and conditions of that space, right? This is what young activists across the country are talking about in self-determining, right? So they're self-determining those spaces, right? So it's not just group healing and everybody get a hug. This is what we're gonna do, right? We know that there are some explicit concerns that we have. Let's get a group to address those explicit concerns, right? And that doesn't have to be this whole thing organized where you got to send proposals to the vice provost of the fax machine or whatever, right? But this thing around really being intentional about those spaces and pulling those folks together, right? And this is another thing around, because a lot of times in organizing work, we think that it's always about mass mobilizations. The lesson that we actually get from the civil rights movement is the majority of our quote unquote movements started in people's kitchens, right? It was 3 people, right? Who made a decision to do some different work. So now, if it's 3 of y'all, all to the good. Let's roll with that. So it's not about, again, that's where we have to get away from the conversion, but to say, all right, if it's just 3 of us, what are we going to do? Let's open up the space. Let's be responsible to the space. Here's what we're going to do in the space. And now you 3 say, who are other folks that we've seen that are going through this, and bring them through. So now you vet the space, right? You keep that space that self-determines according to the terms and parameters that you have set, right? And opposed to this kind of broad thing that may further exclude the folks who should be the focus of this thing, right? And have no fear about doing that, on your own volition, right? According to you and the needs of folks who have expressed those needs.
So here on campus, there's the stigma that is defeating as Chicana on campus, that racism is still just a Black and Latino issue. And, I feel empathy from white students in general. We are learning about racism in class in a very textbook manner. But because of this stigma, it creates a hostile environment. And I really see a lack of community between white students and minority students, regardless of the fact that we are a campus that is fighting against racism. So my question is, how do we, as students, bridge this gap on campus and make a difference every day in our classrooms, because it is a hostile environment.
Yeah, I think is a critically important piece that you laid out. One, it is not your responsibility to educate the white masses on white supremacy, right? That is not your job, right? So when somebody says, can you come to my class and talk about such and such, or how do you feel? So all those answers get killed, right? All that questioning gets killed right there. But what you can say is, White supremacy operates in a way that is known and unknown. What is our commitment to study the way that it operates in the ways that are known and unknown, right? So now the parameters in which you engage with folks are set up based on what you have committed to do. Because in many spaces, the commitment all rests on you, right? So now what is the collective commitment, right? So what is white ally space in the larger project of justice? And then what are they committed to according to them, right? So now when we talk, we're talking on those terms and conditions, right? So that it's this thing around, because again, you can also be rhetoricized to death about this stuff, right? So people can talk, you got all because I was in you all student union, y'all got all the signage, y'all got hella signage here, right? There's always a sign about something. Like, man, right? Thank y'all for giving me the sign to the washroom, Jesus, right? But this thing around now saying, okay, because, we even get into high-end philosophy about this, right? What is the symbiotic relationship between, look, what is the responsibility, right, to the project of racial justice, and who is committed to that, and what are the terms of that commitment, right? Having a conversation there so the burden doesn't always rest on you, right? Because I think that's critically important, because this is work, right? But you can't be the only ones working if somebody's actually making a claim to racial justice, right? That's a different type of work that I think in you all struggle here, you can make a claim to, right? I think it is right and good for you to make that claim, because it's really creating a different set of terms and conditions, right? In a way that we need to think about them, right? But thank you for that question. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for your words. They're very valuable to us. I have a question. As a teacher, how in your work help students realize their interconnected oppression? That when they, my oppression is worse than your oppression.
Right. I think the first thing, and thank you for that, because I think that's critical, right? There is no such thing as an oppression Olympics. Right? That's the first thing I say. Like, that's what everybody wants to do. It's my struggle. No, it's my struggle. No, it's my struggle. I'm going through it the most. The thing is to say, instead of thinking about an oppression Olympics, how are we articulating how we're catching hell? Right? So how do we articulate that? Right? So now saying, okay, here's how I'm in particular, and folks like me are catching hell. Now, who is that connected to? Right? Who else is catching hell in this particular way? Right? And then one of the things that I've been doing, and I got this idea from an artist named Therese Quinn, she goes into this thing around collective statements of solidarity from organizations to other groups, right? So there's a excellent book about this, where a group of folks in central Mexico dedicated themselves to issuing these collective statements. So these were the Zapatistas. And it's a really thick book called Our Word is Our Weapon. And what Subcomandante Marcos and the Women's Brigade were doing, they're writing these letters to all these people around the world who are actually engaged in justice, in fights for justice. So they write a letter to Mumia Abu-Jamal. And one of the things, that, for folks who don't know who Mumia Abu-Jamal is, political prisoner, wrongly imprisoned for the death of a police officer, a guy named William Faulkner in 1982. So they write to Mumia, they say, we are very clear of your work. We read and listen to prison radio. We are thankful for your commitment and recognition of the struggle of the people of Chiapas. So in that space, he says that in that solidarity, and I love the end of it, he says, I hope that one day we will meet. Right? So this thing around really studying those. So I was telling a group of folks last night, the Black Panther Party issued a statement to the LGBTQ community in 1970. Right? Actually talking about, we understand you as oppressed people. And A commitment in solidarity to you all is a commitment actually not just to ourselves, but to our own families where people are also faced with this struggle. All right, so this thing around really thinking about it in very intentional ways, but really kind of getting that Oppression Olympics thing done with, right? Because what the Oppression Olympics does, it prevents you from seeing how things are connected, right? And I think the balance is not for one group to overtake the issues and concerns of another, right? So what is this call for solidarity? What does it look like? What are the terms and conditions of it, right? And you know, now you see folks in political science, they're having classes around coalition politics, right? In terms of how all these things that happen in coalitions, right? The conjoinments and the disjointments. So now really kind of thinking about that in a different way, because it's a critical piece, because once we get introduced to our struggle, sometimes we can be zealots about it. Right? It's just me. Right? I'm the one dying. It just doesn't make it doesn't make sense as we move forward.
Okay, so I had a question. I used to work somewhere at a bank, and basically there was an African American insurance man that just told me straight out, because I asked him a question. All I see was white and not black or brown. That was not top notch good jobs. And I asked him why, and basically he told me you have to be a part of the system. Not part of that system, you're out of the system. And I don't understand what he means. So I wanted to ask, what does he mean by that?
Well, in thinking about that, one of the things that comes to mind is sometimes we can be in a particular condition, and this is a big thing around school, right? So I always separate school from education, right? They're two very different things. And school is more about order and compliance. So when he was talking about that system, what he was really saying was, how I heard it, I should say, is the more you demonstrate your ability to act at the will of these people, the more they're willing to accept you. The question becomes, do you want that for your life? Right? And if you don't, what will you do to make sure that that doesn't happen? Right? And that question, I think, is really important, because the common assumption, I think the common incorrect assumption, is that systems are good first. And that's not always the case. Right? We can build systems that are responsible and effective, but the assumption should never be that it's good just because it's a system. So this thing around resisting that, his statement was more one about order and compliance than it was about what is the justice condition in this place. Right? And then it makes us go even deeper into, like, what are banks? Huh? You know what I mean? So this can get us into a whole study of the IMF, right? You know, in terms of, like, if we really want to make this practical, right? But I think that his statement was more around order and compliance than it was justice. We're doing the same thing.
So I work as a parent in middle school. And I was having conversations with one of my students, and he was having a particularly hard day. I was trying to engage him and ask him questions, and he just straight up said, "You wouldn't understand. I'm just a white lady." And as a future teacher, I want to know how I can support all of my students and let them know that I am on their side and make them really feel supported.
Right. Right. Well, this is gonna sound hella simple. What are the ways that we develop trust? Right? Because think about his statement, right? Because his statement was, look, everybody that I've come across who embodies the body that I'm seeing in front of me has probably castigated me. So what do you do different? Now, that's a longitudinal struggle, right? That doesn't happen instantaneously. Right? And what we have to do first is that if we're thinking about school space, we're thinking about education, and I'm going to say something controversial. We are not here to help. That is missionary shit. right? And we know what missionaries did around the world, right? So if we are not here to help, what are we here to do? We are here to demonstrate that we are willing to work in solidarity to build a justice condition according to what we have experienced in this space. So now, when we say this, let's start there, right? So he was like, he says, you don't understand. A very thoughtful answer would be, you're probably right. Right? Now, because I don't, here's what I'm willing to do. Right? And then be consistent with that, right? Because trust is built only by what we are actually feeling and seeing, right? Not what we're saying. And I think that's a big first in our teaching, right? And that thing around how do we interrupt that, right? Because, and again, if I walk into some classrooms, I might be like, man, whatever, dude, right? I got to start there. Like, okay, say no, all right, let's deal with that. But now, how am I consistent in those spaces, right? So I think about today at Burlington Edison. We saw each other in September, and I saw them way up in the stands at this talk, and I was like, look, I'm about to find y'all, and I don't, whatever for the conference, I'm about to find y'all. We're going to talk, and then by hook or crook, I'm going to be in Burlington in the spring, right? So I came to class today. It was hilarious. Someone was kind of looking like, oh, like you really came. I was like, I think he was just talking crazy. I'm like, no, I'm coming, right? But this thing around what does it mean? So that type of consistency, right? Because it's not, the missionary ideal never works for teaching, right? In fact, it further infantilizes and dehumanizes our students before it humanizes them, right? So because it's this thing, because the assumption is that young people of color who have experienced some certain things are in need of fixing. They are not broken, right? So this thing around, they are whole people who have experienced some things. So now, how do we engage in that experiences with our own to now build towards something, right? That has to be the arc of our teaching, in opposed to this thing around, I just want to help. I just love the babies. Not every day, right? So this thing around being honest about that first. Mm-hmm.
So I got a question. I kind of want to provide some context, just so we can just get a pretty real answer, and just provide some real context for that as well. Over the last, I would say over the last year, when students have been organizing around campus, for different, even to support ESJ as a minor. Yeah. One of the things that's happened is that the students that have been organizing around these issues are labeled bullies, right? By the faculty that preach this a lot of the social justice rhetoric, right? And so even now, as student movements continue to kind of grow on campus, a lot of the administration, a lot of college administration is using the same type of language, right? And labeling students bullies. But the thing that's most surprising to me, right, is that the majority of these faculty members and the majority of these administrators are faculty and administrators of color, right? That were originally hired and brought on campus to kind of to be the diversity person, right? And so it's like, my question is like, if I'm a student that wants to get involved on campus, like, what do I do as a student that wants to be involved with these movements to those administrators and to those faculty? Right. Right. So, being hella real, do we get those people out of here? Right. Right. I mean, if they're here, if they're hired on and they came on for a particular purpose, and they're not serving that particular purpose that they got hired on to be on. I mean, just getting a hella real Stovall answer, what do we do?
Right. So and I think there's a couple of questions there, right? One I think that's important is really to study the colonial project and how it operates, right? So really reading folks like Frantz Fanon and talking about this book about Alfred Mamie called The Colonizer and the Colonized, right? Because there's a role of people of color in colonization, right? People of color can often serve as the buffer between those who are pushing for change from the bottom and the folks in power, right? So now, if it's those people who are saying, calling you bullies or what have you, the first thing to say is, man, this is like colonialism right in front of my face, right? And then they say, bully, check this. Alfred Mamie says that one of the things that the colonized must do is actually recognize the colonization. And what the colonizer will do is pick from the colonizer, from the colonized, who they want to serve as the buffer, right? So now, in that space, some of those folks may need to go, right? But now if we think about process, every committee, and this is university-wide, every hiring committee of a faculty person or staff person needs to have significant student representation on that hiring panel. First and foremost, right? Because that's the thing that's always missing in faculty positions. It's always missing in staff positions, right? The people who the university is actually here to serve are rarely represented in those spaces, right? So having that representation, but also saying, no, it's not bullying. In fact, bullying is the reverse of rhetoric for you to justify the colonial project, right? Because if we really were bullies, you wouldn't be calling us that, right? If we really were bullies, it would be folks around here with AR-15s, right? Thinking it's, what was Bundy's son holding up folks in a little random piece in Oregon, right? And this thing around bullying who, right? You told a little bit of truth and now you funky about it? For real? That's interesting, right? Because in this case, the data is on your side, right? Because a lot of times people make the claim and then they give you kind of slick words. Well, that's anecdotal. No, it's not. And this is why. Boom. Right? So there's no bullying here. We're speaking statements of fact, right? So now, when we speak those statements of fact, it is connected to this larger piece. Because, y'all people catching death threats, right? All types of wild calls or what have you. That, off the top, that should be respected as something that is critical, right? So now, if they understand that it's critical, then they say, all right, look, because this is always the test of the person committed to justice, the willingness to face their oppressor and tell a hardened truth, right? Despite the consequence. That's a very different decision, right? And a difficult one, right? But I think one that we have to engage, right? Because that thing is really where you all will see the folks who are committed, they will show their face, right? But you have to be willing to see them, right? And that those things are only proven in their actions and not their words, to your point, right? But I think those things really need to be decisions. Those are real things that you have to put on the table, right? In terms of, if we're really talking about commitment to shifting the culture here, right? And not even the goal of shifting the culture, but actually saying, all right, look, what is the responsibility to the folks who are in this place, right? And how do we now engage that and how do we now enforce that? But I think a critically important question.
Hi. My family is mixed race. My daughter, she's 12, and she comes home a lot and says, hey, Mom, the teachers, they don't call me names. And this particular teacher, who she really respects, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of that, but I don't get to because I never get called on and that sort of thing. I want to go down there and just tell somebody before.
Right.
But she says, Mom, no, you got to let me do this. You got to stay out of
now she's not with it.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, well, if it was your child, I mean.
Well, the first thing I would say is, well, let's discuss the plan, right? So so now you have this issue and concern. What's the plan? How are you thinking about addressing this? What are the ways that you want to address this, right? And then say, how do you think it's best for me to support you based on what you set out, right? So I think about this, some of you all may have seen this story. Young black woman, she noticed that there was no black representation in schools, in her books. And her mom just said, what are you gonna do? And she said, I'm gonna get some books with black people in it. In fact, I'm gonna go on social media and start a whole campaign to get books with black people in it. And we're gonna give it to other schools for free. And her mom was like, okay. Right? But what she did in that was say, okay, what's the plan? Right? And now me seeing the plan, here's how I'm gonna support it. Right? So whatever that plan is here, how best to support it. Right? And you as parent as the nuclear option. Right? So when it all crashes, that's when you come. But this is the thing, and 12, right? So they trying to find a way, because that's the thing, right? You that age, you too young to do a whole bunch of stuff. You too young to do a whole bunch of stuff, and you too old to do a whole lot of other stuff. And all you got is you, right? Because that's how that 10 to 12 group, it's like it's just us, right? Like nobody knows what's happening, right? It's just us, right? So that thing around being supportive of that, right? Because what it does, it allows them to actually engage some independence, but now you're also able to support them, right? So it's really around. So say, hey, if you want to do this, man, let's get the plan cracking. How we gonna do it, right? But actually being willing to follow through with that plan, right? And that independence, because as a parent, you look at, you kind of cringe when sometimes they do stuff. You're like, right? And then, but you just kind of got to go, all right, here it is. That you have to find, sometimes you got to find your way in it, right? My mother used to crack this joke that she would always worry about me being by myself with my father, because he just believed that babies had rubber in their bodies, right? So one day my mom walks in the house and I'm hanging off of the bed like this. And my father is sitting right next to me. And my mom walks in and is like, what is happening here? Right? My father's answer was interesting. He was like, it's carpet on the ground. Right? He was like, well, why? And then I think right after that I fell. Right? And it was just kind of that thing, boop. And then, with little ones, boop, just kind of get back up and do your thing. But it's that thing around really paying attention, but also having that discernment in how we pay attention, right? But I think, it's asking her, what's the plan? Like, what do you think the best thing is to do? Because another thing that you can do that will probably freak the teacher out, have her write a letter, right? Have her write a letter about what her concerns are, right? And then give it to you. That always has an affect on teachers, right? So for folks who are in classrooms, when your students write you a letter, you always like, ooh, damn, this could either be great or god-awful terrible, right? I can't stand you, right? But that thing around really, because that's part of the plan, right? In terms of making it really tangible. Mm-hmm.
Just a few more questions.
So I have a question. In my experience of talking to people in different majors and different concentrations, what I've heard from professors is that students who aren't in programs that have a social justice emphasis, so I'm thinking of chemistry and STEM programs, and even sometimes with history and other stuff like that, it's the mentality is that my discipline is too rational to have this conversation. This discipline is your conversations don't affect me because
I don't know, some like honestly bullshit about like logic. How do you engage with the conversation with the instructor or professor who's like teaching chemistry and does not realize that like that's still just as relevant? Like how do you like, even if we try to talk about history objectively, you're not, but how do you like have that conversation with somebody when they think that they're above it?
Right. Well, this is always the thing about speaking truth to power. And this thing around, especially, and I'll just use an example of chemistry, right? So I work with a critical chemist by the name of Danny Morales Doyle. And the thing he always says is, science is often created at the interest of science, right? So this thing around objectivity is trash. So when this professor goes crazy and starts to talk about rationales, hand them a video or a stream give them a link to a stream to a video called La Corporation. It's about the Eli Lilly company, right? And this is the development of the birth control pill, right? And then you can get another book called, just slip it in this box, right? Right? And then you can put on a stick note, from me, right? And there's another book called A People's History of Science, right? So this guy read Howard Zinn and actually did A People's History of Science. And then the last book is by a guy named Stephen Jay Gould called The Mismeasure of Man, right? And then you can just drop those three in the box, and you can, on a stick note, you can say, tell me what you think, right? Yeah, so the three are, the video stream is La Corporation, which is about the Eli Lilly company. The book is A People's History of Science. And the third one is The Mismeasure of Man. Because these are things that that are very important forays onto science that really gotta think, shift how we approach it. And then there's a fourth book called An American Health Dilemma that actually talks about the history of healthcare in the United States and who actually had access to it and how people were locked out of healthcare. So that those things, and it's just reference point. Now, it still may not change them, but now you've engaged in a larger project for yourself to engage how we understand this, because nothing is rational beyond the larger project of justice. In fact, science in many ways can be used to obfuscate folks from justice, right? Oh man, and it's this new thing that just came out. Really interesting thing about how people use data, and it's called The Myth of Normal. It's a really interesting book. And it just talks about like how we make these assumptions around what is normal, but normal in and of itself is a measurement, right? It's a mean number. It doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate to anything. And this guy actually talks about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think this is probably something young people of color often encounter, especially folks engaging in justice work. And it's the pushback that we will usually encounter from older folks who that maybe during the civil rights period and what they had done at that time. And how when engaging with young folks, there'll be this air of invalidating our experiences now, or going about it in terms of you don't even know what hard is, you don't even know what we went through, and especially probably in places like Bellingham or what we just call the White Bastion.
Right.
Where people are there is no overt gun violence and stuff like that, and then kind of going at it in terms of y'all should stop complaining so much, you don't know what's going on. So how do we address that intergenerational rift that's happening? And kind of your perspective on that.
Right. And this is 20 years ago, I would have answered that question with a whole bunch of frustration, right? It had just been man, all right, I guess we about to fight right now, right? I mean, but I actually started, so a lot of times we get caught up in the iconography of folks in history. But Che Guevara says a very interesting thing that I think the practice means something even more. He says, as a revolutionary, I am the most deeply motivated by feelings of love. Right? And this thing is tough in that moment because you're frustrated, right? Like, the first response is, who are you talking to? Right? But this thing around, and I learned this from Veto quite a bit, the killing with kindness, which I don't do well, but I need to be more humanizing in my approach. And one of the things that you can say is, I want to be respectful of your struggle. And I want to understand that, I want to be clear that I understand that you have paved a particular road for me. Where we disagree is that this is not just as important. I do not understand myself as someone who is entitled. I do not understand myself as someone who is expecting something. I am understanding as someone who is a student of history, but is also trying to get something done. And if this is where we disagree, this is where we disagree, and I'm fine with that. But know that in no stretch of the imagination am I discounting what you have contributed to my life. Right? And that way it calms the water a bit, but you also do not compromise the integrity of what it is that you're trying to do. And I think that's critically important. So it was a group of young folks in Chicago, same thing happened, right? Elders pushed up on them like, man, y'all don't know nothing. Y'all don't know nothing about struggle. He said, well, guess what? We understand that any death by law enforcement in a city like Chicago is akin to a lynching. We are clear about our understandings of this, right? We are not fearful of anything that is put in front of us. We are prepared to meet the challenge. And they go, whoa. Man, that sounds like fighting words. And they stood on it. Said, look, we are prepared. Right? So this thing around acknowledging but holding firm to the integrity of what it is that we're trying to do. Right? And that's, I don't like to use the word balance. I think something that's much more accurate is harmony. Right? How do we get harmony in those spaces, right? Because balance is the false myth of everything being equal. Harmony is saying that we actually may have to spend some time doing something at one end and more time doing something at another end, right? But also agreeing that that's what is right and good for the condition, right? But I think really pushing ourselves to operate from a space of love.